I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're standing on a tree stump and raising our rod into the air as I rank the bosses of The Legend of Zelda: Oracle of Seasons. Now, of the two Oracle games, Seasons was the more combat-focused entry, meaning the bosses were actually quite tough. I'll also be including the mini-bosses from each dungeon just to add a bit of spice to this ranking, as I think some of them deserve a proper mention. And lastly, the Twin Rover and Ganon fights that come with a linked game will be ranked in my Oracle of Ages boss ranking, as Ages was the game I played second. So subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on that. Without further ado, all 18 Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons bosses ranked. Let me know your favourite down below. At number 18, we have the Garrett brothers mini-boss of the Gnarled Root dungeon. They land here by default for effectively being normal enemies who are given a mini-boss arena. They attack you with their boomerang, passing it back and forth between each other, which is a decent strategy. The shortcoming of this fight though is that their health is tied together, so once you do enough damage to one Garrett, they both die. Meaning you can just harass one of them in the corner while the other can do nothing to stop it, ending the fight near immediately. I 100% am having to reuse the same 20 seconds of footage for this segment because it was just over so soon. A nice throwback to the original Legend of Zelda, and a relic of when Oracle of Seasons was supposed to be a remake of the original game, but everything else on this video is more fun to fight. At number 17, we have Digdogger, the boss of the Unicorn's Cave. Now, it may seem a little extreme to put a well-developed main boss fight this far down on the list beneath most of the mini-bosses, but to put it bluntly, this is a fight you will either love or downright despise based on the dungeon item. You need to use the magnetic gloves to push and pull a large spiked ball around the arena, with the goal being to knock it into Digdogger. Do this a few times and the boss splits into many smaller Digdoggers that you can either continue to crush with the spiked ball or attack with your sword. The annoyance for me here comes from needing to make sure your magnetic glove is on the right polarity, as I found myself accidentally pulling the spiked ball into me when I wanted to push it away and vice versa. It makes for an incredibly tedious fight, and the boss isn't even the problem, it's the tools you're given as the player. While I fully respect the effort that went into designing this encounter, the magnetic gloves just felt way too awkward to use in an intense combat situation in the heat of the moment, and especially on the old Game Boy where everything is quite clunky to begin with. It's not a pairing I particularly vibe with, and I just really hated my time with this boss. At number 16, we have Facade, the mini-boss of the Snake's Remains, who later reappears in Onox's castle. Straight up a copy-paste of the boss fight from Link's Awakening, the issue with Facade in Seasons is that he's not as interesting as the original fights this game has. They took away his signature ability from Link's Awakening to throw tiles and pots at the player, instead giving him a generic fire rain and ability to summon a couple of beetles to harass Link. The whole point of him being a living room meant he could use the room to his advantage, but here he can only create holes in the floor and that's it. I'm okay with reused assets, especially if you make an effort to change them for the better, but that's the key, for the better. Facade's changes don't really add up to much, and thus he becomes a footnote in Oracle of Seasons when he was one of the cooler fights in Link's Awakening. At number 15, we have Aquamentus, the boss of the Gnarled Root dungeon. A remake of the first ever boss in the Legend of Zelda series, I always have a smile on my face when I see Aquamentus in this game. He's not hard in any way, exactly the same difficulty as his original appearance, but he's got an extra trick. He's got his triple fireball shot, which you've got a bit more space to avoid, though to make up for that, his sprite is absolutely massive, requiring you to position yourself more carefully to hit his horn weak spot. He also has a charge attack that players might not see coming if they're too familiar with the original game and his stationary placement. He's the first boss of a 2D Zelda, they're not meant to be hard, and while I wish they went further with his moveset to really make him a threat, I can't blame them for where they ended up. He's a personal favourite boss of mine for legacy reasons, and while I'm ranking him low as a fight in today's video, he ranks highly in my heart. I'd love for him to be brought back in the next Zelda game and just completely expanded upon, please. At number 14, we have Dodongo, the boss of the Snake's Remains. We've seen Dodongos throughout the series, and they all have the same glaring weakness. They love opening their mouths, and we love throwing bombs inside. The same weakness applies here. Wait for Dodongo to open his mouth, chuck the bomb, rinse, repeat, right? Except no. If you leave the Dodongo alone after that, it'll swallow the bomb and be fine. Instead, you have to use the power gloves to lift the Dodongo up and throw it onto the spikes in the center of the room when it's stunned, which will then damage the boss. It's an extra step than what we're used to, and that is enough to make the fight feel a bit refreshing. Not enough to put it higher on the list, mind you, but it's the second boss in the game, what do you expect? At number 13, we have Mothula, the boss of the Poison Moth's lair. A returning boss from A Link to the Past, and a recurring enemy throughout the series, this form of Mothula will circle around the arena, shooting fireballs at Link which you have to dodge or jump away from. Eventually, she'll land on one of the central platforms, and that is your time to strike. She can also summon smaller moths to annoy the player, but her main goal isn't actually to kill you, it's to knock you into the pits in the arena. As we have a Moldorm situation. Fall down, and when you re-enter the boss arena, you have to start the fight from square one, all the damage you did being negated. When I was a kid, this fight drove me up the wall with this mechanic, and while I handily destroyed Mothula in this replay, those old memories still linger. I don't like the mechanic of a war of attrition and having to redo the fight from square one, but I recognize that it was one of the best ways of making certain 2D bosses feel threatening. At least Mothula has a distinguishable pattern, unlike Moldorm, which is why she ranks 13th, and not lower. At number 12, we have the Omuai mini-bosses of the Poison Moth's lair. There are 3 of these creepy blooper-looking squids who periodically rise from their pools to shoot fireballs at Link, and I remember being very confused during my last playthrough. This is the start of my, oh my god, how do I fight this mini-boss arc that carried through the rest of the game, as for some reason I didn't immediately think, oh, power bracelet, lift them out of the pond, attack. I was trying to hit them with my sword or my slingshot, so when I picked one up and tossed it away from the water, I felt incredibly dumb. I like that the 3 of them provided a genuine challenge, as while you focus on killing one, the other 2 can team up to support their friend with cover fire. But as each one goes down, the fight gets significantly easier, and that's what ranks it low on the list. The difficulty peaks at the start, whereas now I know how to beat them. I don't think I'll struggle with this trio again. At number 11, we have Vaya, the mini-boss of the Ancient Ruins. This guy appears in both Seasons and Ages as the mini-boss of the 6th dungeon, and as Seasons was my first game, he escapes at the end of the fight. He's just like the Vyas from Link's Awakening. He'll swoop in from the side of the screen and attempt to dive into Link or shoot fireballs at him. The problem is when you swing your sword to hit him, he tends to jump backwards and avoid your shots. So you have to face away from him and either use a bomb with really good timing to damage him, or use your spin attack which will catch him off guard when he gets close. I like that the boomerang can be used to destroy his fireballs, though it's easier to just tank them or walk around them. And while I appreciate the edge of the arena being lined with spikes, it doesn't really change the fight, as the concept is that the Vaya has to approach you in the center of the room, not the other way around. I like how they expanded a regular enemy from a previous game into a fully fledged mini-boss, and his character appearances across both games give him a nice boost, but not enough to reach my top 10. If I could just take a brief moment of your time while we're ranking the Oracle of Seasons bosses, we are trying to reach at the end of the year 30,000 subscribers. If at all you want to help support the channel, be sure to parry that subscribe button right there so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. It would seriously help out. Or you can consider going the extra mile and become a channel member. It gets you early access to future videos, as well as a shout out in the description and at the end of videos as well. And then maybe some extra special perks coming towards the end of the year, if I have the time to get it all done. We're still furnishing our new apartment, so, you know, gotta put priorities on things. But yeah, back to the Legend of Zelda Oracle of the Seasons. Ooh. At number 10, we have the Great Moblin, a mini-boss fought in the Great Moblin's Keep. This Angry Birds villain-looking ass is terrorizing the nearby sunken city, and it's up to us to finish him off and collect a nice heart container for our troubles. You have to use the power bracelet to lift up the bombs he throws at you, launching them back at him to do damage. This back and forth will go on for a short while until he turns grayscale and launches into a weakness-revealing monologue. The trick is that you need to hurt him with an explosion while he's holding another bomb. This will cause him to drop it behind him into his stack of explosives, destroying the keep. This challenge is just figuring out the timing to make this happen, as it's much harder than it seems, and you can't use your own bombs from your inventory because they're just too small. The Oracle of Ages variant of this fight has more depth, and by comparison, the Seasons variant doesn't hold much weight. Still a fun little concept that deservedly ranks in the middle of the video. At number 9, we have Aganima, the mini-boss of the Dancing Dragon Dungeon. This magical sorcerer will darken the room once you enter, forcing the player to light the nearby sconces with their ember seeds. He'll split into 3 different clones, each firing energy attacks you have to avoid, and your aim is to figure out who is the real Aganima. Unlike Aghanim from A Link to the Past, who is a clear inspiration for this mini-boss, you can't reflect or block his magic, which makes the encounter a lot tougher. By lighting all the torches, you'll be able to faintly notice the real Aganima has a shadow. This is something that admittedly took me more time to realize than I care to admit, and I certainly got a lot of flashbacks to the Crystal Sage in Dark Souls 3 with the magic flying everywhere as I tried to figure out who the real Aganima was. Even with the knowledge of who the true foe is, you still have to avoid 3 different magical projectiles and attack the real one before they warp to new locations, which provides a nice mid-game challenge I really enjoyed. This is the first mini-boss where I could see it being a proper end-of-dungeon encounter. At number 8, we have Saiga, the mini-boss of the Unicorn's Cave. A rather simple fight, this saber-toothed cat can curl up into a large ball, which will then attempt to ram into Link by rolling across the room. Now, I didn't have my Rock's Feather equipped when I first entered, which led to a lot of damage being taken that I could have avoided. His weakness is the red orb on his tail, which when hit enough times ends the fight. Unlike the rest of this list though, I just appreciate how blatantly simple yet tough Saiga is. It's a game of dodgeball, and if you can avoid his pinball bounces, you can come out on top with good positioning and careful planning. But the boss is aggressive enough that you won't get through without a scratch, and that's something I think Oracle of Seasons does extremely well. Let's just say that I got a lot of use out of the Nintendo Switch Online save state feature when it came to later bosses in this game. At number 7, we have the Poe sisters, the mini-bosses of the Explorer's Crypt. Their power involves cursing certain rooms in the dungeon, where if you spend too much time within them, you'll be warped back to the dungeon entrance. You have to get through these rooms as quickly as possible and fight each sister in a side room, where you'll have to defeat them to progress. The red sister wields a lantern that creates fiery trails you need to avoid, while the blue sister wields a sword that she uses to thrust at Link with a charge. Defeating them individually is pretty simple, fighting them together near the end of the dungeon is a little tougher. As I was cocky, I thought I could kill them extremely quickly, and I neglected a certain mechanic. In their final fight, the room starts off lit up, but if all 4 torches go out, you get warped back to the dungeon entrance. And yes, this happened to me right at the end of my fight. My hubris cost me that attempt, and I didn't save state prior because I assumed I was gonna breeze through their fight with ease. Suffice it to say, I won't be making that mistake again. They work well together, still go down relatively easily, but have a gimmick that, while annoying if you don't manage it well, works really good with their designs. Great fight, nice job, sissies. At number 6, we have Gohma, the boss of the Dancing Dragon Dungeon. Where there is Zelda, there is Gohma, one of the most recurring bosses in the series, and yet this Gohma manages to have a little extra sauce compared to the previous 2D entries. Your aim is to attack the Gohma's eye, which can be damaged by firing seeds from your slingshot when she opens it. But she's only got a brief window of time where your shots can land, forcing you to time them correctly. She also has a giant claw this time, which combos with her charge attack. If you don't jump out of the way, she'll charge you, grab you in her claw, and then throw you back across the room. I thought this was a really nice change, as it stops you from face-tanking the charge attack for opportunities to hit. Apparently, you can actually destroy the claw with your sword, but I never did this in my playthrough, instead using the Rock's Feather to avoid the charges and get my slingshot hits in when needed. I love that this boss can be defeated like this, or made easier if you can get rid of the claw, providing a serviceable difficulty for the 4th dungeon. At number 5, we have Frypolar, the mini-boss of the Sword and Shield maze. Frypolar begins the fight in flame mode, moving around the room and firing 2 flaming shots that travel across the floor. You have to avoid all of these attacks and ensure you don't corner yourself with contact damage until Frypolar turns icy. From here, you can either attack him with an Ember Seed, which will do damage but change him back to his fire form, repeating the process, or during his ice phase, he'll try to attack you with these ice spike pillars, and if you mystery seed these pillars, you can then pick them up with the power bracelet and chuck them at the boss for more damage. This is easier said than done though, because of Frypolar's high level of aggression, which for me meant I never had the chance to land a hit with the ice blocks because he'd always hit me and knock me out of the animation. So I just decided to do the Ember Seed strategy, which took a while, because I didn't know that if you used a Mystery Seed on the boss while he's in fire mode, he'll change to ice mode. I could have sped this whole fight up, but I just didn't think about that possibility, and that led to a very frustrating experience. Great fight, fire and ice used really well. Could have been a dungeon boss of his own, to be honest. At number 4, we have Medusa Head, the boss of the Sword and Shield maze. The final major fight before General Onox, and the only original boss in the dungeon lineup, with all other 7 being remakes of bosses from prior games, Medusa Head is a fun time. She's not anything groundbreaking, having what I'd consider to be fairly simple patterns. She'll rotate around Link menacingly, before attempting to shoot him with fireballs, which is pretty standard. The Medusa part of her name comes from how she'll warp to the center of the room and then fire a series of blue orbs outwards, which, if they hit Link, will petrify him for a short time. Now, because I had full health and every heart piece possible up to this point, I tanked the hits and discovered that if you're petrified mid-swing, Medusa Head still gets damaged by the frozen sword. She'll then appear on the top of the screen and travel to the left and right, firing large eye lasers which you can jump over. All of her attacks can be jumped with the right timing, and her patterns aren't hard to understand. It's just whether you want to learn them and go damageless, or play like me and go balls to the wall, attack, 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 and play the luck of the draw. I beat her with 1 heart remaining, and that's the type of finish you relish when it comes to a boss fight. At number 3, we have General Onox, the final boss of the game. Honestly, I was tempted to put him lower on the list, because while I definitely find him challenging and worthy of the title of final boss, there are a couple of things I dislike about his fight. In his first phase, the only way to damage him is via a spin attack. How would I have figured this out on my own? I have no idea. I had to look it up because my regular sword attacks weren't working on him and I just got confused. I like the sequence with Din's crystal where you have to damage him without harming her. Using the Rod of Seasons to boop her away was honestly pretty comical to me, and it was a great way of including it in the final fight. But it's the Dark Dragon form that everyone's here for, and I like it in concept, and I think it's a great fight, which is why it's number 3, but it's also not a fight for me. He takes so many hits to kill, and if you miss an attack, you're forced to wait through a series of surprisingly hard-hitting projectiles before you get another chance. Those blue flames drove me nuts because the tracking on them felt designed in such a way to always inconvenience me, even when I knew they were coming. I was also woefully bad at avoiding the red fireball barrage. It got to a point where I had to save scum to beat this fight. It reminds me of the final boss of Mega Man 3 for those who have played it. But the problem there is that while I love Mega Man games, Mega Man has a completely different kit to Link, and Link feels very, very hard to control in these fights. So yeah, not my favorite in the world, but I'm giving it number 3 more out of respect for the design than my own enjoyment. Verin was so much better. At number 2, we have Manhandler, the boss of the Ancient Ruins. Didn't think this was where he was gonna place, but surprise surprise, Manhandler ended up being one of my tougher fights in the game, and I really liked the way they did this battle. You have to fight in a room with constantly shifting floors, where the aim is to use the magic boomerang to break off each of Manhandler's heads. They'll fire at you throughout the fight, meaning the boss is his most dangerous at the very start. However, for every head destroyed, the boss begins to move faster and faster, and as the arena is quite large, there are times when Manhandler dips out of the screen for a moment, forcing you to either predict his movements or wait for him to reappear. You can aim the magic boomerang to a degree, which is where the challenge comes in, but it's not easy, let me tell you. You can also only damage the heads when their mouths are open for an extra layer of difficulty. Once they're gone, you magic boomerang the buzz blob that remains until it reveals its core, which you slash with your sword to defeat. Just a really solid fight that takes a nice new spin on the Manhandler character. Having it not be a plant, but instead be this biological goop with piranha plant heads was fascinating to me, and I just think it's an interesting interpretation. I could see the argument for Medusa Head or General Onox being somebody's favorite fight instead, and I'm cool with that. I just really like Manhandler, and I don't think he'll ever get this high on a boss ranking again, so it's a shame he didn't land at number 1. At number 1, we have Gleeok, the boss of the Explorer's Crypt. Everybody's favorite multi-headed dragon, he's definitely less threatening than his Tears of the Kingdom counterpart, and yet I love the faithfulness to the original NES game with this fight. He stays stationary at the top of the screen, his 2 heads moving around in tandem. You have to damage them enough so that they break off the body and begin to fly around the room as projectiles. They can fire 2 different types of flame attacks, a single flame that explodes into smaller embers, which is what I saw most of my playthrough, and a conal series of 3 flames that expand outwards that I only saw once. The challenge here is that you need to destroy both heads within a time limit, for once one head has been severed, it can eventually reattach to the body, resetting your progress. Once you defeat the heads though, that's the end of the fight. Except it's not. They fake you out, and now you're fighting the skeletal corpse of the Gleeok, and as you can see, I got wrecked. Fair play, Gleeok, fair play. You need to use the Rock's Cape to avoid the stomps and charges, and use your sword to finish the fight off proper. One of the highest levels of difficulty in the game, and with a second phase that completely caught me off guard in a perfect fashion, Gleeok, you earned your number 1 spot, King. And that's my list. Which Oracle of Seasons boss is your favorite? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future content. Next week, I'll be talking about the Oracle of Ages bosses, so keep an eye out for that. My social medias are on screen now. Feel free to follow me if you're comfortable. I recommend my Twitter or my Discord or my YouTube community tab. They're all good places to go. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing, and I'll see you next time for another video. Adios!